you can't hear, different things that happen to us. Today's Father's Day, and I've entitled my sermon, See Your Father. And this passage in Scripture, it was actually fortuitous that last week we talked about the Beatitudes, because this week we continue Jesus' thoughts in this section of Scripture we call the Sermon on the Mount. It's probably the most famous sermon that Jesus ever preached. It's definitely filled with many of Jesus' most famous teachings and sayings. Most people who know anything about Jesus have at least an understanding of something in the Sermon on the Mount that they think of when they think of Jesus. Today's section of this scripture, Jesus is teaching his disciples basically what they are to the world, how they are to act in the world, if you will, what is expected of them. And he uses two primary metaphors, technically three, but two of them kind of go together. The first is salt. The idea is that you're the salt of the earth. Christians give flavor to the earth. And good flavor, right? Anybody ever been to somebody's house that made some really horrible food and you had to eat it, because you didn't want to be rude, but you're like, whew, this is rough. I'm going to throw a little bit of salt on here, right? Because salt makes things taste better, or at least makes things taste less worse, right? Now, if you put too much salt on there, you're going to have a bad time too. One time somebody made some cookies and I ate them, and they used salt in the recipe, and I think they used, it called for salt, but I think they misread salt for sugar, and it was like crunchy, and it was horrible. So too much salt is bad, right? But we understand that salt it adds flavor. And at this time, salt was a very precious commodity. Sometimes Roman soldiers would be paid in salt because it was precious. It wasn't like today where, you go down to the store and you buy your enormous thing of Morton salt, and all that. It was very precious. It was hard to get. And so having salt, first off, was precious. And so Jesus is not just saying that you're flavorful, but he's saying that you are a precious flavor. You are rare. You are something that the world needs and enjoys. Then he also says that you are the light. Jesus also refers to himself as the light of the world, especially in John. John's really big about Jesus being the light. But here in Matthew, he says his disciples are light. And one of the things he says, a city set on a hill cannot be hidden. At Mays Chapel, I shared with them, I've never been to New York City. I know it's the city that never sleeps. I've never been to Paris. Melissa has. She said it was dirty. But Paris is supposed to be the city of lights, right? But I've never been there. But I have been to Los Angeles. If you've ever flown into Los Angeles, you fly, and once you hit, it's the same with driving too, by the way. Once you hit West Texas, there's nothing. And if it's nighttime, you might as well be over the ocean, right? You don't know where you are. You have no idea. It's just desert and, maybe a little bit of sparseness here and there, but there's nothing. But when you get to Los Angeles, they don't even have to tell you that you're in Los Angeles. The pilot comes on and says, ladies and gentlemen, this is your pilot speaking. We're about to, come into LAX, International Airport, so on and so forth. He doesn't even have to tell you that, because you can see lights all across the ground. And when you see it, you think to yourself, Lord, what in the world kind of power bill must there be? I wonder how much people spend consecutively to keep all of this on. It's got to be astronomical. And the engineering, the electrical engineering required to power this must be crazy. Plus, Los Angeles is a hot place. So air conditioning and fans and all that are running almost year round. It gets a little cooler in the wintertime, but not that much cooler. But you see it. You know you're in Los Angeles. You know that it's there. The lights tell you this is where the city is. And so Jesus says a city on a hill can't be hidden. You're the light of the world. When you come into the presence of a city on a hill, it's there. You know you're there. Jerusalem's a city on a hill. People knew they were coming to Jerusalem. They saw it from a long way off. People know they're coming to New York. It's not a city on a hill, but Statue of Liberty's there and skyscrapers and all that kind of stuff. They know that they're there. The hope, whatever hope they may have, whether it's the hope of an immigrant finally making it to the United States, or the hope of a pilgrim coming into Jerusalem, or the hope of a person who's been on a plane for a long time and just wishes it would land at Los Angeles, your hope is before you. It can't be hidden. And so Jesus says, you're the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. And then he says, men don't light a lamp, put it under, traditionally it's translated bushel. New American Standard translates it peck measure. They don't put it underneath something. They put it on a lampstand. I mean, imagine, okay, we have our candles here. They don't give off a lot of light, especially with the sun and all this, but pretend that it's nighttime and we have these candles here. What if we were like, boy, it sure is dark in here. Let's light these candles and then we'll stick them up here under the altar table. We'll have a bigger light probably because the altar table will catch on fire and then we'll have a really bad day. But you don't do that, right? You stick it somewhere. You stick it on candlesticks like we have, or on a lampstand or something like that. You might put a shade over it just to keep it from blinding you or to direct the light, but you don't light a light and then stick it somewhere. Your light shines. It glows. People see it. People come to it. I have a really bad joke to go along with that. I've probably told it before, so if I have, pretend like I haven't. This moth goes into a podiatrist's office. Podiatrist says, what seems to be the problem? And the moth says, well, I don't know, I'm just really depressed. Pretty sure my wife is getting ready to leave me. My kid's doing terrible at school and he's really disrespectful to me. I go to work, my boss takes advantage of me. I haven't had a raise in like 6 years. Every time I ask for it, he just shuts me down. He takes all the credit for everything that I do. I'm just really depressed. I don't know what to do. And the podiatrist says, well, yeah, I feel really bad for you. It sounds like you're having a rough time. He says, but you probably need to see a therapist. Why did you come into a podiatrist's office? And the moth said, well, the light was on. Because he's a moth, Bruce. I love messing with Bruce. I'm glad you're back, Bruce, for so many reasons. Because moths are attracted to light, right? Things are attracted to light. Light attracts things. Light scares away bad things, right? You can be lost in the middle of the woods and hear wolves howling around you or bears making noises, but if you have a fire, there's a very good chance they won't bother you because they're terrified of that fire. And even if they come toward you, if you take a torch or something and swat it at them, they'll run away because they're terrified. It takes away the power of darkness. So Jesus uses these metaphors, but the most important thing Jesus says in this little passage is found in verse 16. Let your light shine before men and women in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. Jesus says, when people look at you, the way you act, the things you do, the light that you shine, they should see your Father and glorify Him. Now think about that. I have a couple of examples I'd like to share with you. The first one happened last week, maybe? Week before last. Yeah, week before last. We're driving down the road. We decided to stop at the animal shelter because we are gluttons for punishment. Because anybody knows that if you stop at the animal shelter, one of two things happens. You either feel absolutely horrible or you come home with something. Right? Those are the two things that tend to happen if you go to the animal shelter. Sometimes you come home with something and still feel horrible because you couldn't come home with more somethings. So we go to the animal shelter and all they have are big dogs there this time. They don't have any little dogs. I don't care. Dogs are dogs as far as I'm concerned. You know, I love all dogs. And so we're there, and you know, there are various types of dogs with various personalities, and you know, some are kind of whatever, some are a little more aggressive, some are a little happier. But the two dogs there this time that broke my heart. These two dogs are in separate cages. They looked like they were probably related. They were mutts, but they looked like they were the same breed, about the same age. And both of them, when I came by their cage, would look at me and run away. They'd hide. And Melissa was with me, and I would go off to the side, and they would come up and they would see Melissa, and they would lick her hand and let her pet them. But if they heard noise, they'd look and see if it was me, and if it was me, they would run away. That tells me that they were abused by someone that I reminded them of. Whether it was a man, whether it was a big man, a bald man, a white man, a man with facial hair, something about me reminded them of someone that abused them, and must have abused them pretty horribly for them to react in such a strong way. If I had stayed there for a while, depending, continued to work with those dogs, eventually they probably would have come to trust me. Probably. But the thing is that the person who represented me, whatever about me they didn't like, the person who represented that to them showed them that whatever I reminded them of could not be trusted. And it made them terrified. And you know dogs. Dogs are some of the most loving animals in the world, especially if you start out with a puppy and you love them. They are incredibly loving and devoted. Very rarely do you get a dog that just won't, that's just a problem altogether. There are people in this world that see God that way. Because people who claim to be his children represent him that way. Now hold that thought in your head. My next example is this. Went to a concert this past weekend. Don't worry, Sarah, I did not get punched at this concert. I didn't. Everybody was very nice. Nobody attacked me. But this is the first time it's ever happened at any concert I've ever been to. We had protesters. Protesters with their signs up, They had their signs, and I didn't really read the sign. I sort of glanced at them, just a little bit. Mostly it was hot, and I was trying to get into the venue because, I was tired of being hot. But they were there. We walked by them. My cousin Dakota and I went to the concert. We walked by them, and one guy's holding up their sign, and the other guy's talking about how, I don't know, we're going to hell because we're listening to music they didn't like, and they sell beer at the facility, so obviously, you're going to hell because you're in the premises of beer. I don't know how they shop at the grocery store, but hey, whatever, And they have all these different things about why you're going to hell. And we get into the venue, and there's these two younger guys, probably in their early 20s, and they're sitting close to Dakota and I, and while we're waiting for the show to start, we're just kind of talking, and one of the guys says, "Did you see the protesters out front?" And we said, "Yeah, we saw them." And one of the guys said, "I didn't know what they were at first." He's like, "I just saw some people there." He said, "I didn't have a clue what they were." But this particular kid was wearing a Grateful Dead t-shirt from the band Grateful Dead, for those of you who don't know who they are. And he said that the guy said, I see we have a Grateful Dead fan over here. And so this kid says, yeah, I love the Grateful Dead. And the guy says, you're not going to be grateful when you're dead and burning in hell. And of course, we're sitting here going, I wonder if he planned, if he practiced that. Like, boy, I hope somebody comes by with a Grateful Dead shirt because I got a real zinger for him, right? And as we walked by, they were preaching, and most of the people are just like mocking and yelling and doing all this kind of stuff and whatnot. And my cousin Dakota he was raised in a Christian household. He would probably consider himself Christian, but he's currently in a period of questioning transition. In a lot of ways, Dakota's like me in the sense that he thinks about things a lot and he processes things. And so I'm sort of trying to help him through that process. And so he says to me about these guys, he says, why do they do that? And I said, what do you mean? And he says, well, do they really think that they're going to have like a conversion out here outside of this concert? I said, anything's possible, but it's highly improbable that that's going to happen. I said, but having been around people with this particular mindset, I guarantee you that if you ask them to justify what they're doing, they will take a passage, I believe it's in Ezekiel, where God tells the prophet, this is my message for the people. You give it to them. If you give them this message, you are absolved of blood guilt, basically. If you don't, you carry blood guilt for them with you. I said, now, of course, the problem is that, first off, that's completely out of context. Remember, we've talked about context. Second, that was for Ezekiel in a specific place. And third, it's not anything even remotely like what God is talking about. That same principle we still have to this day. You can see it if you go into the office here. I think it's in the office, might be outside, but there's a sign. We have to have it up. You have to have it up anywhere that works with children primarily, but it's for adults too. And it says, if you suspect abuse in the state of Tennessee, you have to report that you suspect abuse. If it's found out that you suspected abuse and didn't report it, you can be held liable for, usually it's a misdemeanor, but still for basically putting this person in danger. And sometimes, and in some states, I don't know about Tennessee, but in some states, if such a thing happens and God forbid the person being abused is killed, you can actually be held as an accessory. That's what God's talking about with Ezekiel there. He's saying, you tell them what I'm telling you to tell them because you're my mouthpiece. And if you tell them, what they do is what they do. If you don't tell them, I'm holding you accountable as well. But I told Dakota, I said, if I had time to talk to them, I would ask them, show me one place in Scripture where Jesus preaches like that. Show me one place in Scripture where Jesus stands in the street with his sign or whatever and yells at people that they're going to burn in hell for XYZ, okay? First off, you won't find that. The closest that you will find is Jesus telling the religious people, the Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees, the people who are supposed to know and represent God, the closest you will find is him telling them, because of you, people turn away from God. That's the closest you're going to find to anything like that. Those people represent a father, if you will, that is not the same Father that Jesus represents. In fact, Jesus' representation of God, the Father, is the Father loves you. The Father expects certain things of you, of course, just as any good father expects certain things of you. But He loves you, and He guides you, and He forgives you when you mess up, and He teaches you how not to mess up next time. And He gives you grace, and He gives you mercy, and He feeds you, and He clothes you, and He protects you, and He shows you that other people are important too. And He even goes so far as to instead say, because you did this, you're going to hell. He says, Father, forgive them because they're ignorant. They don't know what they're doing. That's the Father that Jesus represents, and it's the Father that we're supposed to represent. So I want us to think about this. Think about when you interact with the world, what Father do people see? I'll appeal to my friend in nerddom, Miss Allison over here. Allison and I both love us some Star Trek and some Star Wars, but we're going to go with Trek because it's supposed to take place in our world. All right, so in Star Trek, the story goes that a man named Zefram Cochrane created the first warp drive. That allowed you to go traverse the stars, right? And when he did, the Vulcans, which is where, for those of you who aren't big Trekkies, Spock, Mr. Spock, not Dr. Spock. Dr. Spock is the child psychologist. The Vulcans show up and say, hey, we're the Vulcans. We're peace-loving people. We worship logic, essentially. We've been watching you guys for a while. You finally achieved interstellar travel. And so we want to share our technology with you. We want to basically make a covenant with you, work together towards the betterment of your people and the galaxy, so on and so forth. Okay. When the Vulcans got here and they met Zefram Cochrane, they met a representative of humanity that showed them the good side of humanity. Right? Well, for all intents and purposes, Zefram Cochrane wasn't the best guy if you follow everything, but at least as far as what the Vulcans are looking for. So let's just pretend that today after church, we head out of church, we're going to wherever we go for lunch or maybe take a nap, and a UFO lands in the street. They land in the street and they see this building. And they say, what is this building? And whoever they happen to meet says, well, we call this a church. Well, what is this building's purpose? Well, it's primarily a place that we go to worship our God. Oh, so you're representatives of your God. Right, we're representatives of our God. Well, tell us about your God. So we tell them about, God to the best of our ability. Some of us might still be trying to figure out if we've, drank something that's messing with the, our stomach or something. Having an Ebenezer Scrooge moment, think we had some bad meat or something. But, we tell them about God and all that, and they say, oh, that's interesting. Well, we'd like to follow you around and observe how your God influences your life. And you say, okay, how many of us would be able to represent our God well enough that what we told them we believed and what we lived out meshed well enough that they could say, I see your God in you. See, Jesus tells the Pharisees at one point, they fuss because the disciples don't wash their hands. They're eating food, they don't wash their hands, they're ceremonially unclean, that's gross. And Jesus says, guys, nobody cares if you wash your hands. At the end of the day, nobody cares. Because it's not what goes in that is unclean. It's what comes out. Your actions, your words. And in doing so, Jesus declared all foods clean. But he also showed us that what you truly believe is what comes out of you. You reflect who you are, even when nobody's looking, right? So the question for us today is, when we go out into the world, go to work, go to school, go to Walmart, go wherever, drive down the road, what Father do people see? What about God do we tell people by the way we interact with them? I want to share one final story, and then we will do communion. I want to give the caveat of not to share this story to toot my own horn. Not at all. But it really, it made me feel like I was doing something right. As you all know, we had annual conference this last week, went to annual conference. My friend Laura, who used to live in Knoxville, now she lives in Asheville, she's like a sister to me. Don't get to see her very often because, like I say, she lives in Asheville. But Lake Junaluska is pretty close to Asheville. And so I told her, I said, hey, I'm in town. Thought I'd stop by, say hey, see how you're doing. And she works as a bartender. And she says, well, I'm working tonight. And I said, well, do you mind if I stop by? You know, just say hey to you. She says, yeah, sure. I'd love to see you. So I go there. I said, I'll be the one dressed like a priest, right? Because I had on all my stuff. She thought that was hilarious. So I got there, and it was close to closing time. So it was pretty much just her and this guy that I'd never met before. And I went down there, and, you know, she introduced me to him and so on and so forth. And he and I actually had to talk about Christianity and Methodism and, you know, this, that, thus, and so, a good talk and everything. And Laura is not a Christian. She's barely religious, but she knows that, you know, she knows who I am. She knows that I'm a pastor and all these things. It's not something I hide. And of course, you know, when you're dressed like this, unless it's Halloween, you can't hide it anyway. So, and so, you know, we're talking whatever, and I had to go to the restroom, so I went to the restroom. And the way that this place is set up, they have one restroom, and the place is fairly small, so you can hear everything that's going on outside the restroom while you're in the restroom, right? So I'm in the restroom, and I hear her talking to this guy. And she says to him, she says, you know, Sam is the kind of person that every Christian should be, that every Christian should strive to be. And she, not that long ago, her boyfriend, who she was very in love with, just kind of told her, see you later, honey. Left her with, you know, a lease, and she doesn't make enough money to cover the bills, and that's why she actually had to take the second job, and, you know, that, one of those kinds of things. And so I had a little extra money, so I gave her money. She didn't ask me to. I just said, here, you know, it's not a big deal to me. But she told him, she said, he gave me money that I didn't even ask for after Jake left. And he's never asked me to, he never said, you need to pay me back. He's never said one more thing about it. And she said,